there's an intention that governments are taking, there's an intention that leaders are taking that's different from the stated intention that they're telling the public. And then from that division, there's a third narrative that comes out from media, right? And that media narrative is partially crafted by big media and partially organic and undirected by all of the new media that's coming up, right? So we're all swimming in information, but none of us fucking knows the truth.
Yeah.
And we all know that we don't know the truth, which makes it worse.
So there's like three narratives there, right? There's the intentions, then there's the public, I guess, expressions of those intentions. Then you've got mainstream media with their own, biases and their own history. And then you've got new media with their own biases and maybe lack of history.
Correct.
So a lot of these podcasts are being accused now of having no journalistic skills and being responsible for these random narratives posing up. They say, hey, bro, I'm just talking, right? Then the mainstream media says, we're journalists. And it's like, yeah, look how that's worked out the last 10 years. And then the governments get accused. And then people get mad at governments for advancing the interests of their people. And you're like, well, isn't that what they're supposed to do? So there's a lot of weird things.
So here's what CIA teaches us, right? CIA teaches us that all stories are built of two parts. They're built of a message and a narrative. So when most average people talk about a narrative, what they're actually talking about is a message, what's known as messaging. The difference between messaging and narrative has to do with what levers you're pulling on inside the person's psychology, right? If you're pulling on emotional levers, that's messaging. I tell you a message that's emotional. But then after you receive my message, you will create a logical narrative for yourself.
Right.
So what happens all over the world and what's happened all the way back to Rome and before is people are feeding the public emotional messaging. Whether it's a business, whether it's an emperor, whether it's a politician, they feed these emotional messages. You see them in every commercial. You see them in every recruitment drive for the military.
Right.
You see them in parades. You see them everywhere, right? Emotional message.
Right.
From that, groups of people then collate around a narrative that they believe is logical, right? Army of one, be strong, be a Marine, right? Army strong. You've got all these military, that's messaging that's emotional. Like, oh, I want to be independent. I want to be capable. I want to be strong. And then the narrative from that is, oh, America's strong because our military is strong, because our military is powerful from the message. That's the narrative that comes out. And then that narrative is adopted by foreigners and Americans alike and interpreted in different ways because Americans feel, yeah, we're powerful. And everybody else feels, oh, fuck, America's powerful.
Yeah.
And that's what happens all over the world. It's what the Ayatollah is doing right now in Iran.
Yeah.
It's what Netanyahu's doing right now in Israel. Messaging and narrative.
And it was what Trump does as well. And that goes down to what he wears, the recent military parade in the US we hadn't seen in a while.
Yep.
The way he interacts with the world is that I'm the new tough guy and I'm making America to be this. Biden, we saw him on the beach falling asleep. And so you can see the images combined with the emotions, and then that story lands with people. And then that can be augmented or taken down with social media and media on the top of that. And we saw that during lockdown and COVID, safe and effective. That's the mass psychosis you talk about a lot. And we've seen it used in lots of ways. I'd say the public is getting more hip to that, I think. But then again, they say just when you think you know what's going on, maybe you actually don't.
My hope is that the public is waking up to the fact that there's a process. I don't know that they know the process yet, which is why I spend so much time in front of a camera, trying to teach that process. Okay. Because we've talked about how governments create messages and narratives, right? And that's very, very real. I've been in meetings with congressional committees where they're literally choosing what is our messaging and what is our narrative going to be about this topic. So they already know they're not being honest. They know that they're shaping something to maximize the opportunity for a predictable narrative. Right. That's the way the government works. When you layer on top of that journalistic intent, now I am a big fan of journalism. I want to say that outright. I like journalism. I think journalism had a place in the past that was critically important.
Yeah.
But where it is now is a very different beast, because journalism is about taking a series of narratives and weaving them together into a story. And every journalist listening is going to know this is true, and it's going to be absolutely damning on their face. If they don't have a story, they can't publish. So they have to create a fucking story.
Right.
They can't just tell us the facts. They can't just say, this happened.
Yeah.
They have to say, this other thing happened first, this thing happened next, and here's what's probably going to happen, and here's how everybody feels. It has to be a story. And their mission as journalists, is to create a story that will hopefully do X, Y, Z, make the better a better place, make the world a better place, inform nations, educate people. They have some sort of mission depending on their publication. But they have to make a story. How fucking dangerous is that, man? Without making the story, they're not considered journalists.
Right.
And that's where the new media comes in now, because now new media doesn't have that publishing impetus to create a story. So they just, like you said, it's all opinion. It's opinion and observation and pontification and extrapolation, which isn't necessarily any better or worse, but at least now they're willing to have a conversation about facts and openly say, we are speculating on what could happen next with these facts, but let's focus on the facts, which is something that neither media publishing format ever did before. And
they don't have a big media company behind them that has to sell a bunch of ads, and although they have to probably sell their own ads, and they don't have this legacy of probably being infiltrated by the censorship industrial complex of the government for the past 100 years.
Right.
So they're a little bit more independent. And Joe Rogan never got a call from somebody in government saying, don't print that. But the New York Times surely did 20
Absolutely.
years ago, 50 years ago, 100 years ago. So they don't have that bias. Look, we make documentary films. And when you watch one of my documentary films, you're like, oh, this is just, like a camera followed Brian around when he went to South America and drank the ayahuasca and then went to talk to his parents about their divorce. No, it's actually a crafted story to give you a hero's journey, because without that narrative, they won't learn anything.
Right.
So we kind of know that you have to tell a story. And most people just think stories are normal. And that's the way the world is, this hero's journey, when in fact, it's not that.
Stories are an art form.
Yeah.
And that's what journalism used to be. It used to be a blend of art and fact that was regulated. So it had to be free and fair and unbiased. But all that melted away in the 70s. And now journalism is just competing for clicks the same way that any other influencer is competing for clicks. So none of that is designed to serve the end user. Just like you said, it's meant to serve the advertiser, most of which don't like advertising in mainstream media. Because what advertisers want is high quality, highly vetted leads to come into their platform. Yeah. Well, when you only have 4 major publishing broadcasters, nothing's quality. You're talking to the 17-year-old Republican just as much as you're talking to the 80-year-old Republican. So do you put on the fucking toenail fungus medicine ad, or do you put on the gun ad? They don't know. And advertisers hate that, which is a large part of why they're migrating to new media too, because new media is hyper isolated.
Yeah, I was watching Steve Bannon's War Room on Twitter the other day, and I saw his ads come up. And they were really old guys pitching gold and all this. And I was like, okay, I get the demo. It's a very different demo, but obviously one that works really well for them.
Right.
All right, all that considered, what's going on with the US, Israel, and Iran? Let's talk about that from your perspective, with your background.
So first of all, I want to say, I think what's happening is extremely rational, very logical, and it's timed intentionally. So what am I saying? I'm saying I don't think Israel's pulling puppet strings over Donald Trump, and I don't think Donald Trump is making strategic decisions that are in the best interest of the United States. I don't think any of those small things are happening. What I think is happening is that Netanyahu, after the October 7th attacks, realized that he has kind of a once-in-a-generation opportunity to combat what is truly an existential threat for Israel, Iran being that existential threat. He has an opportunity to kick them back decades or longer in terms of their ability to launch a realistic threat against Israel.
Right. Great line in politics is never let a good crisis go to waste. And so it was a terrible thing that happened that day, but at the same time, it gave him potentially the power to do things he couldn't normally do.
Correct. It gave him an opportunity, a window of time when he had the people behind him, he had his own war council behind him, he had the military behind him. So he had to act fast, very similar to 9/11, when a divided, a very complacent United States all of a sudden had everybody's support to go do whatever you got to do, right? Okay. So Netanyahu realized that and moved on Gaza very quickly. Now, the narrative that came out of Gaza is divided. Some people think it's an ethnic cleansing or a genocide of the Palestinians. Other people think that it's a validated hunt for Hamas that's hiding among the population. So there's 2 different narratives that are in limbo. But from the lens of Netanyahu and the lens of Israel, they are depleting Iran's capability to commit conflict in Israel. This is almost identical to what we're seeing in Ukraine and Russia, right? Ukraine is systematically depleting Russia's ability to do harm in NATO. Israel is systematically depleting Iran's capability to cause havoc across the Middle East. So in both cases, you have a proxy conflict that has many, many players involved, even though only two countries are really committing resources.
Okay, let me pause you real quick. Some say Netanyahu let it happen. Some say that it was just an opportunity. Do you have a comment on that without going too deep down the rabbit hole?
In my experience, the probability is that it is not any kind of conspiracy. The probability is that IDF forces identified the attack, escalated through internal communications, but IDF didn't communicate well enough with Mossad and Shin Bet, and then as a result, a disaster happened. That's only because 9/11 is an example of that. We have multiple examples of cross-communication within a democracy not working effectively to secure the border. So I would say it's 80% probability that happened, 20% something shady happened. Now, I'm not saying nothing shady happened after the attack. What I'm saying is in the lead up to the attack, to believe that leadership would let their people get hurt, that's a stretch compared to the idea that maybe people just weren't very good at their job.
But still shocking that it happened from all of your tradecraft and everything you know, still really a wild event that could happen and then go on for so long, 6, 10, 12 hours, without the response.
It's fascinating because it really demonstrates the difference between the idea that we all have of Israel and the reality of Israel.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. And that's every time we have that juxtaposition, it's really important. The idea we had about Russia, the realities of Russia. The idea we had about Ukraine, the truth about Ukraine. And we all have to understand what we believe to be true is an image that is crafted over time, just like Mossad has crafted an image. And they are currently trying to recraft that image with these wild exploits all over the world.
Even the belief in U.S. military power versus the reality in Afghanistan or Iraq. That was another big one. And again, the U.S. is trying to repair this with this B-2 bomber.
Yes.
The 12-day war, again, that's a part of the narrative. Not a single, American died. They're trying to build that back up.
Right. We launched 13 Tomahawk missiles from underwater in a submarine. Why the fuck would we do that? We already knew the Tomahawk missile wasn't going to penetrate deep enough to cause damage. So we did it really just to show the world, hey guys, we can launch cruise missiles that are highly targetable, that are almost impossible to shoot down from a submarine underwater. And they launched it after the B-2 raid. So mission accomplished, and now it was just like fireworks at the end.
Yeah, Bannon said the same thing. He said that was just, that was just a little bit of a show-off move, but didn't seem to really have the point. Okay, so you set the scene. Bibi has this opportunity, and he decides to take it all the way. And that's what's happened over the last almost 21 months.
Yeah, because if you think about it, if you look at it through the lens of strategic intent, right? Yes, Netanyahu is in trouble in his own country. He's got a population that only partially believes in him. He's got corruption charges. He's got all sorts of legal issues. So the longer a war lasts, the longer he gets to delay punitive action. Plus, if he's the guy that saves them against Iran, maybe then the courts will go easy on him. So yes, all of that's true. All of that exists. We can't ignore that. However, you also have to acknowledge the fact that up until October 7th, you had Houthis threatening Israel, Hamas, Hezbollah, both threatening Israel, and Iran threatening Israel. And 3 of the 4 of them had all promised to destroy the Israeli state. That's existential, right? Existential threats are threats that truly will destroy your existence, the existence of the Jewish nation, the Israeli nation. Since then, he has gutted Hezbollah leadership. He has gutted Hamas leadership. And he has basically shut down any air defense in Iran at all. And we're all wondering whether or not he's going to gut Iranian theocracy leadership as well. What that means for the people of Israel is they have breathing room. Whether they put him in jail or not, whether this ends tomorrow or ends in another 2 years, they have breathing room before they have to worry about any existential threat actually rising to a place where they can truly snuff out the Israeli state. That's the hope. But the challenge is we don't know if that's the reality, because the fact that they destroyed, we are claiming to have obliterated these facilities in Iran doesn't account for the fact that we also have always believed that they have secret, smaller facilities separate from these 3 enrichment locations, where after they enrich to 60% in one location, they relocate the uranium to enrich it the final 30%. So nobody really knows publicly if we're actually safe or whether we're just giving ourselves a pat on the back for destroying these centrifuges.
So fresh on me. Freedom!